This video lecture will be defining what we mean when we say cases. What are cases in political science, and what kinds of cases do we study when we do small n research? So what is a case? Here's a definition of a case. A case connotes a spatially and temporally delimited phenomenon, which we call a unit, and this case comprises the phenomenon that inference attempts to explain. So this definition is from Gehring, 2007. And we denominate the number of cases we have with an n. All right, so thinking back to previous material we've covered in the class, we would talk about the number of n in our sample, and those would be all individual little cases that we're trying to explain. So if you're looking at a sample that has 2,000 respondents in a survey, those would be each different cases that we'd be attempting to explain. With small n research, we're going to be looking at just one or two or three, just a couple of cases and focusing on those in more detail. So let's talk about what cases might look like in practice, just to get thinking about what this means. So for example, your case might be a social movement, and we have three social movements here. The one in the top left is the Piquetero movement in Argentina. This is a movement of unemployed people that are fighting for public jobs. On the right, we have the Bolivian water wars movement. So this is a movement fighting for greater control over water in the city of Cochabamba, Bolivia. And on the bottom is an education movement in Chile demanding changes to the higher education system. So these are three social movements that emerged. And if we were going to be doing a study that compared these three social movements, we'd have to say, what does our social movement entail? What time period are we looking at? Are we only looking at people in this one city? Are we looking at the linkages across different locations? So how do we define it temporally? How do we define it in terms of location? What are the boundaries that we're putting on those inside and outside of this case? Another example you could think of would be voters. So this would be a case where you're looking at an Indian election, and then each person would constitute a separate case, right? So then you would be looking at trends and how voters overall behave in this election. Or maybe your case would be the different elections. So you would compare how an election in 2002 compares with an election in 2012, compares with an election in 2010. And you'd have to say which was your main focus. So which do you find as your case? And finally, these are examples here of economic crises. So in the top left, that's a picture from the 2008-2009 financial crisis. The top, so that was the top left. The top right is from the Great Depression in the United States. And in the bottom, that's a picture from the Asian financial crisis of 1997-1998. So maybe you're looking at financial crises and you're looking at cases of financial crises, in which case you'd have to establish what counts as a financial crisis, when does it start, when does it end. And so when we say, the financial crisis in the United States in recent years, when would you talk about starting that? When would you talk about stopping it? Or another way you could look at this is that each case could be within the United States or within OECD countries, looking at each year for GDP changes, in which case the year itself would be the case. And so with this graph, this is another way of capturing that idea of the financial crisis. We see right here there's a major drop in GDP growth, and so you actually had a contraction of the economies. So in this case, you would have the cases be individual years. So there are ways of looking at the same phenomenon that define cases as different. So this means that you have to be really clear about what it is exactly that you are studying. So there are some questions that you should ask about your cases. First, what are the boundaries of the case? So if you were to define the cases, how would you put those boundaries around it? Is there a particular period of time? Is there a particular geographic area? So how would you say what is and is not the case? And then what is the universe that's underlying your cases? So what is this a case of? What is the larger category of phenomena in which I'm interested in? So overall, are you interested in all economic downturns? Are you interested in financial crises? Are you interested in economic calamity that reaches the level of a depression? So you need to specify what that would entail, because you're going to be making hypotheses and asking questions that are about your specific case or cases, but they're really about some larger phenomenon. So if you're going to be developing theory, where would you think that your case, the analysis that you do of your case, where do you think that that finding would travel to, is how we call it in political science. And then finally, thinking about representativeness. How does my case relate to that larger universe? So, do we say that this case is particularly high, or is it particularly low? Is it typical? Is it unusual? Is it surprising in some way? We need to specify that. It's not inherent on its own until we put it within this larger universe of cases, what the meaning of that case is in the end.